Dark Dream. Dark Dream is a scary story about three girls who spend a weekend in a cabin in the woods and learn about a creepy urban legend. Samantha had two best friends named Jenny and Amber. Her father took her on vacation for the weekend and she invited them to come with her. Her family owned a hut in the woods, and on Friday night, their father drove the girls there. "See this lake?" Samantha asked when they arrived. "This is Lake Samantha. My father grew up here. He loved him so much that he named me after him." That evening, after they had unpacked their belongings, the three girls sat around and thought about how to entertain themselves. "Anyone have any creepy stories?" Amber asked. "I have one," Jenny said. "This is a true story. It happened to a friend of mine. She was babysitting two small children one evening. She is sitting alone in the dark, watching TV, and then the phone rings. She goes to the phone, picks up the receiver and hears a very heavy voice on the other end of the line, which asks, 'Have you checked the children?' Jenny, come on." Amber interrupted her. "Everyone heard it. This is the most stupid horror story in the world. Does anyone else have a story? What is really true?" "I know one," Samantha said. "There is an old ruined house about 10 minutes walk from here. We passed him on our way here. It stands to the side of a narrow side road. A long time ago a man lived there. His family was very wealthy and owned hundreds of acres of land in the area. This man met a simple country girl from a simple provincial town, and they fell in love. His family didn't like it. They thought that the girl was not suitable for him, but he did not pay attention to them. He was an independent guy and built a small house on a piece of land somewhere in the wilderness. He married this girl and everything was great. They had a daughter and then a son. This is where the story starts to deteriorate. Their son was sick. Not physically, but morally. He had a headache. He wasn't mentally retarded or anything like that. He was just a little out of his mind. By the age of 9, he was too big for his parents, throwing tantrums, hiding in the woods and hiding, something like that. Not knowing what to do with his son, the man turned to his family for help. His parents took the boy away. They sent him to a remote place in the forest. It was not an insane asylum, but it served people with special needs, if you know what I mean. His parents thought it was for the best. Over time, the family got used to it. Gradually they stopped going to him. They acted as if they had never had a son, and everything became wonderful again. 8 years later, the boy, who was then 17 years old, managed to escape from the hospital. The officers searched but did not find it anywhere. His family was notified and they were devastated. They were worried about his safety. He was alone in this desert for several weeks and probably died. But the boy didn't die. One night he found his way home. He sneaked into his house and, one by one, killed his entire family, his father, his mother, his sister. He chopped them all to pieces. Blood was still dripping from the axe, and it disappeared into the forest. When the gruesome remains of his family were discovered a few days later, the townspeople in the vicinity were horrified. The police tried to find the boy, but it was useless. Until now, he has not been found. Since then, every year, during the harvest, people began to go missing. And in their place there was a doll made of corn husks. Legend has it that the boy still wanders through the forests in these parts. The surrounding cities have bought into this legend, and they hang dolls at their front doors for protection. They say that if a boy sees a doll hanging on the door of a house, he will walk past the house and leave the residents alone. No one knows if this is true or not, but a doll hangs on the doors of every house in the city. This is so creepy. Jenny exclaimed. Do you have a doll hanging on your door? Of course, Samantha said. My dad says he doesn't believe in the legend, but we hung up one just in case. I think I just got my underwear dirty, Amber said. Apparently, the ghosts of his murdered family still roam the house, and if you go up there late at night, you will hear how it all happens again. Do you think we could go up there? Jenny asked. Of course, said Samantha. But tomorrow, in the light of day. There is no point in tempting fate. That night, the girls slept in the same room, huddled together, trying to pretend that they were not afraid of this story, and expecting to hear a knock on the window at any moment. The next morning, Samantha's father made them a hearty breakfast, and they went swimming in the lake. At about noon, they decided to head to the old haunted house. Arriving there, the girls felt an ominous presence in an old, dilapidated place. It was enough to give them goosebumps. They surveyed the ruins of the old house, peering into corners and clearing out the rubble. After a while, Samantha noticed something half buried in the ground. It was some kind of book. She dug it up and brushed it off. The girls gathered around when she opened it and began turning the yellowed pages. It's kind of like a diary, Samantha said. Maybe this is his diary, Jenny whispered. Whose diary? Amber asked. This guy. Jenny began. The guy who killed his family. Samantha read the diary aloud while the others listened. There's a dedication on the cover, she said. To my family, which I love and cherish, and which will always be with me. September 5, 1987. It was hard for me alone. All they had to do was talk to me. They couldn't talk to me. Sometimes I hear their voices late at night. I can hear their screams. It's cold and dark here. I needed love. They didn't like me. The drugs are gone. I am free of them all. If they couldn't love me, they had to leave. A dark dream for everyone. I can still hear their voices. Always shouted. December 4th, 1987. They stopped looking for me. Now everything is all right for me. I live in the forest. I chase animals and put them in a dark sleep. Just like mom, dad, and sister. I visit my old home at night. I listen to the voices. At least now they are talking to me. October 3rd, 1995. I left the forest many years ago and moved to a small town nearby. Nobody will recognize me. Nobody knows who I am. Sometimes I hear people tell my story. It makes me laugh inside. They are all afraid of me. I still sometimes go to the forest. I spend my nights in my old house. Mom and Dad are still talking to me. They say they are very proud of me. November 2nd, 1998. Life was good. I found a job. I bought a house. I met a girl. She is very quiet and pretty. Sometimes I take her to the forest. She likes it. I let my mom and dad see her. They like her. July 1st, 2000. Today is a great day. Now I have a child. I'm so happy. Mom and Dad are now grandparents. But my wife is not doing very well. It was very difficult for her. She may not be in time. Maybe she will go into a dark dream. Now I'm happy. August 13, 2010. I am so proud of my child. She is the same as me. Only she's much smarter. She has no problem. She doesn't hear voices. She goes to school and has many friends. Not like me. Sometimes I take her to the forest with me. I love her so much. I named it after the lake. Samantha. There was a stunned silence for a few moments after Samantha stopped reading. What the hell? Jenny exclaimed. Samantha, is this some kind of joke? Amber asked nervously. It's not funny. This can't be true. Samantha whispered. It can't be. And then they heard the branches crunching behind them. When they turned around, they saw Samantha's father standing there. There was a strange, painful expression on his face, and in his hands he held an axe. You shouldn't have found him, he muttered. Now there is no other way out. A dark dream for everyone. No, Daddy. Samantha shouted. Not. When Samantha's father finished butchering the bodies, he put them in large plastic bags and buried them deep in the forest, so deep that no one would ever find them. Now they could be together forever. Now I will watch over you, he muttered, digging at the ground with a shovel. You may not understand now, but in time you will. This is the only way for us to be together. A dark dream forever, we all stay together. There was one half-abandoned house in our area. They were about to demolish it, so it was often empty. But then a young couple with a child moved to one of the apartments in this house. When asked why they moved to this particular dilapidated house, the answer was always the same: we temporarily, until we move into a house without a bathroom. Nobody attached any importance to these words. Yes, a wonderful answer, but who cares? So they lived until, one day, they discovered that a married couple had disappeared, and the whole house was smeared with blood from the inside. This is a house, not an apartment. It all started as usual: the police, the ambulance, the witnesses. Usually, the attesting witnesses only said that they heard shouts and slaps, similar to footsteps. But one elderly grandfather said that when he heard a cry, he went to the door to look through the peephole. When he clung to his peephole, he saw that a girl was running, their new neighbor, all stained with blood and with a child in her arms. The baby was quiet, despite the cry of the mother. The girl looked around all the time, as if she was running away from someone, and when she went down to the flight below, everything was quiet. But after a while, a sound was heard, as if a heavy sack of potatoes was being dragged across the floor. The police did not understand anything. Everyone was at a loss. The forensic medical examiner came to collect blood on the walls of the entrance to determine whose it is. When they said that this blood was not human or animal, but inhuman, people were shocked. Someone immediately left, someone hesitated, but very soon the house in which the whole family disappeared was completely empty. Then the fun began. The police came again. Everything was in the old way, in the entrance, in the apartment. And it seems like it's time to finish the story, but the most interesting is just ahead. They say the police figured out to look under the bathtub after one of the police guys washed his hands. He just awkwardly took a towel, which fell next to the bathtub, and when it was picked up, it was found that there was blood on it. The tub was pulled out, and underneath it was found gnawed bones with cartilage, dried blood stains and remnants of clothing. I must say that there was also a huge gray spot, right on the tiles. A second forensic examination was carried out, which showed that the remains belonged to the owner of the same family. In a torn jeans pocket, a note was found that read, "Run." It lives under the bathroom. Needless to say, the next day there was a funeral of 5 people, or rather their pitiful remains, which were in this apartment. It must have been something that killed them was big and strong, once dealt with 5 people, but how did it hide under the bathroom? This house is not demolished, fearing to anger the owner living in it, and the local legend says that he gets out from under the bathroom to hunt on the very day when the family was killed. They also say that he took away all the blood in the house. It must have licked her with its bloodthirsty tongue. In winter in the vacation home. This story was told to me by a colleague from a previous job. It was winter. Mary and her husband are desperate and easygoing personalities. So, they sat somehow, corresponded at work with each other, and one of them came up with the tempting idea to buy a pizza and go to the country. So that you understand, they go to the vacation home only in spring or summer. And then they decided to enjoy the winter countryside romance. And what? There is electricity in the vacation home, a heater, too, and even 2. They left the city at 8 o'clock in the evening. Have arrived. The frost is felt even more strongly than in the city, high snow drifts. They went into the house, turned on the heaters, sat down to eat already cooled pizza, talking about the fact that they had opened the summer season early. It's cold, it's dark outside, and there's no neighbors in the neighborhood. They are so desperate, they came for a picnic in winter. In general, they decided to finish their pizza and leave. Then they heard the sound of footsteps outside the door. Someone very heavy was climbing the wooden porch. This was followed by knocks on the door, and they knocked so that the door was shaking. There are no neighbors, silence, darkness, cold, and outside the door someone really wants to break in. The girl's husband, Mark, armed himself with an axe and went to the door. Mary followed him. From behind her husband, she asked, "Who is there?" The answer came, "It's John. I came to make up." John is Mary's brother. Their relationship was always cool precisely on the part of their brother, and after some scandal they stopped communicating altogether. Mary was very worried about this, but pride prevented her from going to a truce. Naturally, she ran to open the door. But her husband stopped her, asking why he had come to make peace at the vacation home, and not come to their house. The man at the door ignored the question and began addressing the girl directly. He put pressure on the fact that he had come to make up, and his sister was behaving inappropriately. He took the first step, and now with her behavior she would ruin everything, and they would stop communicating altogether. He said that he was cold, he was tired and hungry, and they were well fed and warm. Mary tried to open the door again, but Mark motioned her to wait. Going to the window, where she was more or less normally able to connect, he dialed John's number. He picked up the phone and when asked where he was, he replied that he was at home with his family. Then, frightened that the couple would come to visit them, he began to say that his whole family was sick, they were in quarantine, and in general, they went to bed. Now it's time for Mary and Mark to get scared. Her brother was clearly not behind the door. Someone, realizing that the prey had escaped, struck the door with all his might for the last time, and there was silence. They sat for a long time, not daring to go out, but they had to go back. We got out, quickly ran to the car and drove home. Then Mary, finishing her story, noted that only her and her husband had footprints on the snowdrift. There were no more traces. Head. Now I'll tell you something that I myself still can't believe. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't even sit on pills. There were no problems with the psyche. I do not suffer from insomnia, there was no stress. But it is impossible to explain what happened with something logical. We bought a vacation home in the fall. The house is not big. Consists of one room, divided into a living room and a kitchen by a partition. A door from the street leads to the kitchen. A small room 2 by 3 meters. By the window there is a table and 2 stools. Opposite the table is an opening into the hall. There is a stove on the left side of the opening. On the right is the same partition. There is no furniture in the hall yet. So my mother and I went to this vacation home to pour water from the barrels in the garden. It is believed that if this is not done, the barrels will either burst, or something else. In general, they will become unusable. We arrived, I unlocked the door, enter the kitchen. I turn to face the audience and see something round on the floor in the middle of the hall, with hair. At the place where people's eyes are located, this something has a darkening. Not eyes and not empty eye sockets, but just like dark spots. And there is also a tubercle in the place of the nose. In short, as it dawned on me that it was a head, I instantly jumped onto the table with fear. I turn, but this head is not visible. I immediately had creepy thoughts in my head. Starting from it hid behind the wall and waits for me to get off the table, and ending what if it managed to get under the table. And what to do? It's scary to run, and you don't seem to see anything under the table, and what if this has the invisibility mode turned on, only I get down and... In general, I scared myself even more. I stand on all fours on the table and now I look under the table, then into the hall. Now I remember that it's already funny. The door creaked and I jumped on the table. And this is Mom. I really wanted to laugh at me, asked about the mouse. I explained to her that I saw some kind of head. Mom grabbed my hand, pulled me off the table, and grabbed my bag at the door too. Outside, the house was locked with a key. And we went into the garden to sort out the barrels. Although I was shaking, no one would do our work for us, and frost was soon promised. While the water was being poured out, my mother told why she did not do it herself the last time. 3 days before that, she went to the vacation home. She said she went into the house. She looks at something lying on the floor in the hall. Something that looks like a doll's head or a mannequin's head. As if the eyes and lips were erased on this something, and there is a tubercle in the place of the nose. I thought that the former owners left. And when in an instant this head disappeared, then my mother felt uncomfortable, grabbed the bag, which she had thrown on the table before, and ran to the stop. She herself, she said, was surprised that the door was locked with a key. While I was on the bus, I decided not to tell the family anything, so as not to frighten me. Now I have two questions: what was it and what to do with the dacha? I answered the first question to myself: maybe, for example, the same house protects from thieves, he simply does not know that this is now our dacha too. And with the second answer we will wait until spring. Maybe what happened by that time will be forgotten. And I hope it will not be repeated again. The Beast in the Dungeon. A chilling premonition, annoyingly circling in my confused, but still able to resist consciousness, turned into confidence. I was alone, finally, and hopelessly alone in the maze of the wide mouth of the Mammoth Cave. Stumbling in place, I scanned the space with a tense gaze, but in no direction did I see a sign that would indicate the way to salvation. I could no longer see the blessed light of the day, caress the lovely hills and valleys of the beautiful world that was far away. My consciousness could no longer cherish even a shadow of hope. She left me. However, life introduced me to the caste of philosophers, and I experienced considerable satisfaction in the dispassionateness of my behavior, although I had to read about the indomitable rage that fell into the unfortunate ones who found themselves in a similar situation. I did not feel anything even close to such a state, and, to the same extent, I was unmoved, in which was aware of the complete loss of orientation. The thought that I must have gone beyond the limits set aside for walking did not deprive me of my composure for a moment. If death awaits me, but the majestic cave, having become a crypt, will give me the same warm welcome as the cemetery, and this consideration echoed in me with a wave of calm, not despair. I was sure that the last sign of my fate was waiting for me ahead of me. I knew that the lot of many, whose path I repeated, was madness, but I felt the other end was waiting for me. I had no one to blame for my misfortune. Without the knowledge of the guide, I left the obedient ranks of amateurs and for more than an hour wandered along the reserved passages, but now I clearly understood that in the whirling labyrinth I could not find the path along which I had left my companions. The light from the flashlight turned pale. The moment was approaching when pitch darkness was supposed to envelop me. Inside the melting, wrong circle of light, I numbly drew myself an accurate picture of impending death. The report I heard about a colony of tuberculosis patients who settled in this gigantic grotto, hoping to restore health in the healing climate of the underworld, with its constant temperature, clean air, pacifying peace, but found only death, and were found numb in strange and terrible positions. I saw the sad sight of deformed remains together with the rest of the group, and now I wondered what bizarre deformities a long stay in a huge and silent cave would have on such a healthy and strong person like me. Well, I said ominously to myself, if hunger doesn't cut my life too quickly, I will have a rare opportunity to solve this riddle. The rays of light were brought together by the last convulsion, and they were swallowed up by darkness. I decided to try all the possibilities of salvation, not neglecting even the most ghostly one, so he gathered all the power of his lungs in the vain hope of attracting the guide's attention with a volley of dull cries. Yes, letting out screams. Deep down I hoped that they would not reach the goal, and my voice, echoing, reflected by the endless fractures of the black labyrinth that had swallowed me, would flow only into my ears. Nevertheless, I became wary when suddenly it seemed to me that I was catching approaching footsteps, gently pressing into the stone floor of the cave. Did liberation come so quickly? Was it possible that, contrary to my nightmarish premonition, the guide noticed my criminal absence and followed in my footsteps to find me in the confused kingdom of limestone? These questions overshadowed me with joy, which was growing, and I was ready to renew my screams in order to bring the moment of salvation closer, when suddenly my delight was replaced by horror. My hearing, always sensitive, and now even more sharpened by the complete silence of the cave, conveyed to my numb consciousness the confidence that steps are not like those of a man. In the gloomy stillness of the dungeon, the guide's step would have echoed with a distinct, sharp shot. The sound of footsteps was soft, creeping like a cat. Listening closely, I saw 4 bars instead of 2 in my gate. I no longer doubted that with my screams I had awakened some wild animal from sleep, perhaps a puma, who accidentally got lost in a cave. Maybe, I thought, the Almighty does not threaten me with hunger, but another, faster and more merciful death? The instinct of self-preservation, still warm in me, stirred in my chest, and although the impending evil force carried deliverance from the slow and cruel end, I decided that I would part with my life only for the highest price. Oddly enough, but towards the alien, I felt nothing but hostility. Assessing the situation, I hid, hoping that the mysterious beast, not distinguishing a sound, would lose orientation, as happened to me, and would pass by. However, my hopes were not destined to come true. The inhuman tread was steadily advancing. Apparently, the beast smelled my smell, which filled the untouched space of the cave. I looked around in search of weapons that would protect me from the attack of an enemy invisible in the eerie darkness of the cave. I managed to find the largest stone of those that were scattered everywhere, and I grabbed it with both hands, preparing to fight back and resigning myself to the inevitability. Meanwhile, a terrifying rustle was heard quite close. However, the behavior of the monster was strange. Listening to his footsteps, I had no doubt that a 4-legged creature was moving with a characteristic interruption between the hind and front legs. However, for several short and irregular intervals, it seemed to me that I could distinguish the gait of a bib. I wondered what kind of animal was approaching me. I thought, the unfortunate creature must have paid for his curiosity, which prompted him to explore the entrance to the gloomy grotto, by imprisonment for life in endless niches and passages. He had to eat blind fish, bats, and rats and, perhaps, fish that comes across in the floods of the Green River, in some incomprehensible way communicating with the waters of the cave. I filled my gloomy vigil with reflections on how being in a cave distorts the physical structure of living beings, recalling the disgusting appearance of consumptive people who died here. After all, the local tradition associated deformities with a long underground life. Suddenly it dawned on me, even if I manage to collide with the enemy, I will never see his appearance, because my flashlight went out a long time ago, and I did not take matches. My brain was strained to the limit. A frustrated imagination pulled out of the darkness that surrounded me and pressed on me with increasing force, nightmarish frightening silhouettes. Closer, closer, terrible footsteps were heard very close. It seemed like a shrill scream was breaking out, but even if I dared to shout, it is unlikely that my voice would have obeyed me. I was petrified with horror. I was not sure if my right hand could handle the projectile when the moment came to throw it at the oncoming monster. The uniform sound of footsteps was heard nearby, now really close by. I could distinguish the heavy breathing of the beast and, despite the shock, I still understood that it had arrived from afar and was exhausted. Suddenly, the witchcraft was dispelled. My right hand, unmistakably guided by hearing, threw with all its might the pointed piece of limestone, which she was squeezing, towards the dark space of the source of breath and rustling, and in an amazing way the projectile immediately reached its goal. I heard someone jump back and froze. After adjusting, I threw the second stone, and this time the blow exceeded all my expectations. Joy overwhelmed me. I heard the creature collapse with all its weight and remain stretched out and motionless. Almost broken by the ecstasy that seized me, I leaned against the wall. I heard breathing, heavy breaths in and out, and suddenly I realized that I no longer had anything at hand to hurt the beast. I didn't have the same desire to know who that someone was. In the end, I was seized by something close to an unfounded superstitious fear. I did not dare to approach the body, while I no longer thought about a new attack, fearing to completely ruin my still burning life. Instead, I started as fast as I could, in the direction where I came from. Suddenly I caught a sound, or rather a regular sequence of sounds. In the blink of an eye, it disintegrated into sharp metal shards. Down with doubts. It was a guide. And then I screamed, growled, even howled with delight when I noticed a dimly shimmering glow in the archway, which, as far as I understood, could not be anything more than the approaching reflected light of a flashlight. I ran into the light and suddenly, not having time to understand how it happened, I fell on my face at the feet of the guide. Gripping his shoes, I gave up my vaunted restraint and got lost in words, incoherently poured out my horror story, mixed with a stream of bombastic expressions of gratitude, on the stunned listener. Gradually, I felt that my mind was returning to me. The guide noticed my absence only when the group was at the exit from the cave, and, intuitively choosing the direction, delved into the maze of passages that originate in the place where he last spoke to me. He managed to find me after 4 hours of searching. Listening to the guide's story, I, inspired by the light and the fact that I was no longer alone, began to think about the strange creature I had wounded, which, hiding in the dark, was lying a stone's throw from us. I was tempted to pierce a beam of light through the veil of secrecy that hid the appearance of my victim. We soon found something inverted, white. Whiter than limestone, radiating whiteness. Moving with all caution, we, as if in a single impulse, screamed in amazement. Someone did not answer any conceivable idea of creatures monsters. Before us lay a gigantic anthropoid ape, which must have fought off the wandering menagerie. Her coat was snow white, bleached, of course, by the inky blackness of underground palaces, and surprisingly thin, rare on the body. She covered her head with a luxurious shock and fell over her shoulders. The features of this creature, who had fallen on his face, were hidden from us. Its limbs were strangely outstretched, however, they hid the clue to the change in gait, to which I drew attention earlier. Obviously, the animal moved, using now all four, now only two supports. Long, rat-like sharp claws hung over the pads of the fingers. The limbs did not look tenacious, an anatomical fact that can be explained by living in a cave, as well as the impeccable, almost mystical whiteness, which I already mentioned. The creature was tailless. Breathing weakened, and the guide took up the pistol to finish off the beast, but he suddenly made a sound that made him lower the weapon. It is difficult to describe the nature of this sound. It did not sound like the cry of monkeys. Its unnaturalness could only be explained by the impact of the boundless and grave silence, now disturbed by the glare of light, lost by the strange creature since it went deep into the cave. The sound, deep and trembling, that did not fit into any of the classifications known to me, died away. Suddenly, a subtle spasm ran through his body. The front limbs jerked, the hind limbs cramped. A convulsion threw up a snow-white body and turned the face of a monster towards us. The horror in his eyes wounded me and paralyzed my attention for a moment. Black, fiery coal eyes contrasted monstrously with the whiteness of the body. Like all prisoners of the cave, his eyes, devoid of the iris, sunk deeply. Looking more closely, I noticed the not too developed jaws and the smoothness of the face, unusual for primates, without traces of fur. The lines of the nose were rather correct. As if spellbound, we could not take our eyes off the terrible sight. Thin lips parted, releasing a shadow of sound, after which someone calmed down forever. The guide gripped the lapels of my cloak, and it shook so violently that the flashlight trembled wildly, and weird shadows danced on the walls. Straightening up, I stood motionless, not taking my eyes off the floor. The fear was gone, giving way to amazement, compassion, and awe, for the sounds made by the sacrifice, which I struck down and stretched out before us on the stones, revealed a blood-curdling truth. The one I killed, a strange inhabitant of a creepy dungeon, was, at least once upon a time, a human. Death of a witch. My mother is an ethnic German. She was born in Kazakhstan in 1949. She was brought up at home before school, so she only learned Russian at school. Accordingly, he speaks German almost perfectly. My father was born and raised in Ukraine in one of the villages of the Vinnytsia region. In the 66th year, when he was 22, he volunteered for Kazakhstan, where he met my mother. In September 68, they got married and immediately left for Ukraine. They wanted to arrange their life there. In the early days, they wanted to get married again according to a church ceremony, since there was no such opportunity in Kazakhstan. The village is small, everyone knows everything about each other, and during evening home gatherings, my father's grandmother told my mother about their neighbor, a witch who lived 2 houses towards the forest. They say, this witch hurts both people and pets, and keeps them in fear of most of the inhabitants of the village. My mother is impressionable, she was scared, and my father only laughed and said that all this was nonsense. Nobody knew how old the old woman was. The parents said that she looked about 100 years old, all wrinkled, unkempt, but she still moved quite briskly. Where, when exactly, and how she appeared in the village, and whether she had any relatives, no one knew. What she lived on was also incomprehensible. She did not have a vegetable garden, as such, and animals too. In general, solid questions. There were rumors that she could damage the damaged by order. She corroded unborn children. No one, of course, confessed, but abortions were not performed in hospitals. On the days when my parents arrived, it was known that the old woman had been seriously ill for a couple of months and very rarely went outside. At such moments, she stood at her fence and either silently, intently, with malice looked at those passing by, or cursed everyone on which the light was standing, and tried to throw something. Over time, people learned this, and when they saw her at the fence, they went to another street. The most interesting thing is that everyone who ever met her and could more or less examine her said that her teeth were extremely well preserved, almost like those of young people, despite her age. On the day of the wedding, my mother went out into the garden early in the morning to pray. I read the prayers in German, but she said that she was very quiet, almost to herself. No one standing further than half a meter could make out anything. And then she says, I open my eyes, and behind the fence this old woman stands in front of me and looks at me with such anger, and when I saw that I noticed her, let's yell and curse at me. Among other things, she shouted, why did you come here, rubbish? I was standing. At first I could not figure out anything, but she put her hand in her pocket, took out something, threw a handful of earth at me and hobbled away. I have tears in my eyes from resentment, the earth is stuck in my hair. I run into the house, and their grandma just woke up. I told her everything. And then the granny reacted so violently. She woke up everyone who was still asleep, told my mother to close herself in the hallway, undress, put her clothes in a bag, put on a nightgown to her heels and let her hair down. She told my father to flood the bathhouse and went to church. She returned rather quickly with 3 candles, took the old cross from the iconostasis, grabbed my mother and a bag of clothes, and into the bathhouse. For about 2 hours she soared, washed her head until 3 candles burned out, and burned a bag of clothes in the bathhouse in the stove. The wedding was at noon, everything went well. In the evening we took a walk at home and went to bed. And at night my mother felt bad, the temperature rose, a strange rash appeared, as if they were stripping with nettles, only much brighter. She began to rave, trembling all over her body. My father said she looked so bad, they thought she would die. The nearest hospital is 30 kilometers away, there are no cars. They immediately called my great-grandmother, she made some tea from her reserves, poured several mugs into her and read prayers over her all night. 2 hours after the onset of symptoms, everything went away as suddenly as it began, and she fell asleep rather quickly. In the morning she felt great and remembered almost nothing. On the same day, he and his father quarreled heavily. And now both do not know why. It got to the point that my mother packed her suitcase and went on foot to the station to return to Kazakhstan, which is about 30 kilometers. And then again the great-grandmother intervened. She caught up with her on the cart, persuaded her to go with her at least for a while, to her house. She said that it was damaged, and she would try to remove it. Mom stayed with her for 4 days. Granny did not let her out of the house. Every day she ran to church for candles, almost continuously read prayers, now over her mother, now in front of the iconostasis. The most interesting thing, Mom says that every day she sifted flour several times over her head and then put dough out of it and baked bread. The first loaf didn't rise at all, it was rather a flat bread. Granny did not touch her with her hands, took it through a towel, took it out of the house and buried it outside the garden. The second and third turned out much better, but still not as good as usual. Their great-grandmother fed them to pigs. The fourth came out wonderfully well, airy, rosy. She crushed it to the pigeons and said that now everything is in order. Mom no longer held any grudge against her father and ran away to him that evening. Parents say that during their family life they quarreled more than once, not without it, but as on that day, they never fought again. And my great-grandmother 2 days later fell seriously ill. She lay for almost 2 weeks, they already thought she would not survive, but then everything went away. Moreover, there were no definite symptoms, as such, it was just bad weakness. The doctor threw up his hands, said that, most likely, there was a hypertensive crisis and he needed to go to the hospital, but the grandmother did not agree. On this, everything seems to be settled. But a few weeks later it became known that that old woman was lying at death. We found out quite by accident. People, passing by, heard loud moans and inhuman howls from the house. In the evening a crowd had gathered, the chairman pounded on the door for a long time, and the old woman laughed in the house and did not open it. The door was broken open, but no one wanted to enter the house. The doctor had to go himself. After a couple of minutes he came out and said that the old woman was terribly dehydrated, exhausted, and delirious. He does not have the opportunity to do something on the spot, and she will not survive the road to the hospital. Therefore, they decided to let her die in peace at home. They thought that she would not survive the night, but they were abruptly mistaken. The next day, the groans and curses in delirium did not stop. There was always someone near the door, but they did not go inside, so the stove was not heated. Although winter had not yet begun, the weather was rather cold and damp, and it was constantly drizzling. Surely the house was no more than 13 degrees. Someone said that the witch will not die until she hands over her gift. They decided that if he didn't die by morning, they would call a priest to pray. The next morning the old woman moaned further. A priest was called. We stood in the vestibule almost opposite the bed, did not dare to enter the room. In addition to the priest, there were several old women who sang along with him and 5 peasants from the village who regularly took turns, including my father. Dad said that the sight was not a pleasant one. On a greasy mattress lay an emaciated, skin and bones, gray-haired old woman with such black and evil eyes that everyone present tried not to catch her gaze. She lay restlessly, with barely moving lips, exuding from herself some words, sighs, curses, obviously referring to those present. Attacks of powerlessness gave way to aggression, black anger, in the impulses of which she tried to jump up from her deathbed, but then again in powerlessness she fell on the bed. By the end of the 3rd day, the priest said that it was necessary to dismantle the roof above the bed so that her soul could finally move away. The chairman began to be indignant, shouting that he would not allow damage to property and would report everything to higher authorities. The chairman was hit in the face and locked in the stable. They said, anyway, no one would believe that the whole village had rebelled. 3 men climbed onto the roof and began to dismantle the roof and ceiling above the bed. By 11 p.m. everything was ready. My father said that when the rustling on the roof began, the old woman became quiet, made almost no sound anymore and did not take her eyes off the ceiling, and then from the hole. About an hour later, after the roof was dismantled, the old woman died with a long sigh. Here, in my opinion, mysticism begins. My father helped put the old woman in the coffin, and when he bent over her, he was shocked. In his mouth, almost all of the teeth were in place. But these were almost completely rotted, black and yellow stumps, especially the front ones. They were broken off and worn off by more than half. Father said that this picture remained in front of his eyes for life. When he told his mother at home, she did not believe it. She said or imagined it or invented it, but the great-grandmother confirmed it. If the teeth were really good, then they could not come to such a state in a few weeks. For the last 7 years, the old woman did not leave the village for sure. There was not a trace of the dentist there. For dentures, the natural teeth must be removed. And then there were no such prostheses. Really, everyone dreamed. The house was set on fire as soon as the coffin with the body was taken out. At least until 1987 there was a wasteland overgrown with weeds. But that's not all. The grave was dug behind the cemetery wall. The cemetery is located on a hill, and dug, it turns out, on the slope. When they removed about 1 meter of earth, it turned out that a hole was dug right above two granite boulders, converging in depth with each other in a narrow crevice. Nobody wanted to dig a new grave, they just took out the clay between them, as much as they could, and left it that way. That is, it turns out that there was a normal grave on top, and then its stone walls converged downward like a funnel. The coffin could only be lowered to the depth that the width of the grave allowed. There was still emptiness under the box. When the ropes were pulled out, what was expected happened. The coffin fell off, fell over and fell sideways to the bottom of the crevice, while a long crack, about 3 centimeters wide, formed in the upper side wall. The priest said that this was a bad sign, but no one wanted to do anything else. So they covered it with earth, and put up a wooden cross for the rest. In the spring, the cemetery watchman walked around the territory, looked at the witch's grave. The cross rotted, practically collapsed, and this in a few months. They put a new one. The following summer, my parents returned to Kazakhstan. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for them in Ukraine. They learned the end of the story from the letters. In the spring of the following year, the situation with the cross repeated itself. The crosses rotted and fell apart, as if they had stood there for at least 10 years. Atheists said that this side of the hill was simply too damp, and believers that the witch could not calm down. Then, on the advice of the priest, they forged an iron cross with a very long lower end, about 2 to 3 meters, which was sharpened. They consecrated him in the church and drove him into the grave all the way into the ground so that the sharp end would pass through the body, surrounded by stones and poured with concrete. Nothing much has happened since then. My father said that when in '87 the grandmother was buried, he went down the graveyard wall to look at the witch's grave. The cross was still sticking out of the bushes. Subscribe to the channel not to miss new stories.